Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second to last day of the 2021 edition of the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival. This year, we had an abundance of films and industry events that consisted of masterclasses, workshops, presentations, panels, talks, info sessions, and a new discussion series entitled Ask the Veterans. We also still have Q&As and alignment live with the filmmakers, so please be sure to check out our website or social media pages to find all the events or films that you might be interested in. There's only one day left. So today, I'd like to welcome you to the live presentation of Music Clearances in Film, brought to you by the support of Republic Bank Limited. When it comes to legalese, do you know the difference between protected music and music in the public domain? How about the difference between using an original musical score, pre-existing musical compositions, or sound recordings? Among the plethora of details a filmmaker must remember when producing a film, legal requirements for music licensing has proven to be one of the more tricky areas for local producers to grasp. There are various types of music licenses used in film production, and in this 1-hour presentation, IP specialist Fabian Alfonso will clarify the details of music clearances in film. Fabian Alfonso has been actively involved in the creative cultural sector for the past 30 years. He is an advocate for the overall development of our creative industries, and he is passionate about the appropriate administration of copyright and related rights in Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean region. Alfonso lobbied for the updating and passing of the Copyright Amendment Bill and the signing of the World Intellectual Property Organization Performances and Phonograms Treaty. As a copyright-related rights consultant and educator, he has conducted workshops and lectures at institutions such as UTT, COSTAT, Serval, UWI Roytech, and several private and public music schools. He holds qualifications from the World Intellectual Property Organization in Geneva, Switzerland, and his areas of proficiency include industrial property, copyright, related rights, and collective management of rights within the creative industries. So without further ado, I will now hand you over to our facilitator, IP specialist, Mr. Fabian Alfonso.
A pleasant good afternoon. And my name is Fabian Alfonso, and I will be doing the presentation on the topic music clearances in film. So I believe we can, in the interest of time, we can get right into it. Okay, so we can maybe come down to the next slide. Right, so how this is going to go, I will do an overview of intellectual property rights with reference to music. We would cover and explore the various categories of film that's used most of the time, original scores, original songs, and pre-existing music. By that time, we will delve into licenses, how and where to obtain them, and we'll show the difference between music that is in the public domain versus music that's protected, and we'll end off by understanding the adverse effects of not obtaining licenses, such as copyright infringement or infringement as a whole. I trust there's time that we can go into some very interesting questions. So we can go into the next slide. So, what is intellectual property? Intellectual property refers to the expressed creations of the human mind. And the words that are underscored and highlighted here are the words expressed and human. This is to say, intellectual property exists when the ideas and the thought processes that emanate from the human mind are expressed and saved as creations or intangible or tangible expressions or assets. We can go to the next slide. However, the language of intellectual property, it's very meticulous, it's very organized, and it's very specific in that all of the expressions we can identify are actually protected under a specific area of intellectual property. Intellectual property is broken down into two branches: industrial property and copyright and related. Under industrial property, we would come across things like patents and trademarks, industrial designs, and other lists of things that we would not be dealing with today. And for today's presentation, we'll be dealing with the other branch of intellectual property, copyright and related rights. I have highlighted two of the expressions here, musical works and song recordings that film producers would usually come into interface with, and I will proceed to explain those in the upcoming slide. Thank you. So what is a musical work? A musical work is described as a melody with or without lyrics. And that is ascribed to the author of the musical work. And he is recognized as the rights owner. And based on my previous slide, I've mentioned that every expression is protected on a specific area of intellectual property. In this case, musical works are protected under copyright. And we can go to our next slide. So we discussed the song recording. The song recording, very different from a musical work, is the recorded performance or interpretation of a musical work, or it's a recording of any sound or other sounds. The thing about a song recording, it's a process, usually done in a studio environment where you have many moving parts, and the individual who's responsible for putting those parts together, directing the vocalist, instructing the music engineer, instructing other musicians, will be the producer, just like a film director. And therefore, ownership is ascribed to the producer of the song recording. In terms of IP protection, it gets a little tricky in that song recordings are usually protected under the other area of copyright, which is known as related rights or neighboring rights. But some countries prefer or have chosen to protect song recordings under the doctrine of copyright. So if you're doing research and you see song recordings under copyright, just be cognizant of the fact that might be based on the territory where you are doing that research. Our next slide, I'm having a sip of water. This slide illustrates that there are two distinctive rights in your song recording. And we have to continuously recognize a piece of music or recording as very multi-layered, very, very composite, very multifaceted. And we can approach, or we can use the concept of reverse engineering to identify the various elements in a song recording. And the first element, always the copyright, the lyrics and the melody. And the second element is the song recording itself, the contribution of the vocalist, the musicians, and the producer, which is separate and different from the underlying musical work. And I trust that this is to the original musical composition that accompanies a film. So traditionally, what would have happened is a composer would compose this piece of music, and then he would have to engage with live instrumentalists to more or less bring it to life, such as a live symphony orchestra. And the process that occurs here is an integration, right? You see the still shot and the symphony orchestra. It's an integration of the sounds made by the symphony orchestra, and it's merged with the moving image of the film. And that actually still is described as scoring to picture. But there was a paradigm shift, and we can go to our next slide. And the person responsible for that paradigm shift was renowned composer Hans Zimmer. He pioneered the use of digital composition software to create and record original film scores. And the concept I've used before, where scoring is an integration of sounds with moving images, that still stands today. The difference is that the songs are not limited to a symphony orchestra, but it includes computer-generated sounds as well as conventional or non-conventional instruments. The examples here, we must not see original scores as just random pieces of music. They are actually, composers actually name their scores the same way a songwriter would name their song. Why? Because they want it to be identified and recognized among other pieces of scores that exist out here. So we can go to our next slide. So the other category is original film music or original film songs. This is very similar to original scores. The difference is, though, that composers would have to engage with a vocalist or a singer to complete the recording. So it is actually described as an original film music, which is written, composed, and produced for a specific film. At first glance, we should all recognize all of these offerings here. And they tend to be very successful and have a life of their own. For example, on our lower right, See You Again by Wiz Khalifa and Charlie Puth. I mean, that song went viral. And those of us may be aware of the backstory that prompted this song to go viral. But nevertheless, from all of these songs, regardless of how successful they are, credit, 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 credit. Credit must always be given, or is always given, to the film that first introduced this music. The lower left, Let It Go, it was a phenomenon. I mean, this song was so popular that the producers were prompted to translate this song in many different languages. And that is a takeaway from the type of leverage and freedom you have when you're working with original music. That maybe with open source and pre-existing music, you may not have that leverage to translate as freely as you wish. But anyway, that's the fun part. In the context of clearances, though, let us note this. These songs before us, their very existence came about as a result of the film's existence. That basically created a question of ownership. Who owns these songs? But an agreement will establish that. And you have two scenarios. Scenario number one, composers are asked to transfer or give up all of their rights to the film producer for the right price, of course, you know. And then scenario number two, composers are asked to retain ownership for a lesser negotiated fee. So we can conclude, as far as clearances are concerned, when we're dealing with original music, they are dealt with on a case-by-case basis. So we can move on to our third category. So the third category of music is pre-existing music. And from first glance, what I mentioned before, the question of ownership, there's no issue of ownership with pre-existing music. Why? Because the songs are already owned. There are existing recordings that have been chosen and licensed by the film's producers. So the example on our right, quite recently, the song Lean on Me, written by, I think, passed on recently, the late Bill Withers of 1972. That song was used in the movie Amphibia. And we must note, though, that the disadvantage with using pre-existing music is that no one prevents a film producer from using this same song in a future movie. Likewise, no one prevents a film producer from using a song that was previously used in a prior movie. For example, the movie on the left. The same song, Lean on Me, was used back in 1989. And various versions of this song, Lean on Me, were used throughout the film. And what's worthy of note is that those who remember this movie, the song Lean on Me was actually performed live by one of the actors. And that would have created a very interesting type of clearance for the type of license that the producers would have had to obtain, which is a good precursor to get into our issue of licenses. So next slide. Yes, so we can go into licenses. Nice, very nice. So a license is an agreement where rights owners grant permission to users to use protected content for certain purposes. My colleagues, every license here is linked to a specific component or element of a musical recording. It either links to the musical work, the lyrics and melody, or it links to the song recording. And we cannot at any time replace or substitute any one of these licenses for any other license on this list because they all serve a different purpose. The two I've highlighted here, synchronization and mass use license, I would describe in the next slide, but before we do that, let's point out that the mechanical license, our far upper left, it's very specific to film producers who have chosen to compile all of the audio music within the film and present or promote as the film's soundtrack. I've heard the term soundtrack being misused, but we can leave that probably for question and answer. The other licenses, they are quite important, but let me just say for the print license was specifically recognized to get permission from the author of the musical work to place the lyrics and the score within a music book. But quite recently, when it comes to music videos, where we animate the lyrics and incorporate within the video, that is incorporated within the video, a print license, among other licenses, must be obtained. So we can go to the other slide. So this is an overview of sync and mass use licenses. The sync is short for synchronization. So let's look at our left, the synchronization license. The moment we see the word synchronization license, it links to a specific element within the entire song recording. And that is the musical work, which is protected under copyright. And that grants authorization to use the musical work in visual images as in a motion picture or television program. It's that simple. On our right-hand side, we look at the master use license. The master use license is linked specifically to the sound recording and nothing else, where authorization is granted to use that sound recording also in visual images as in a motion picture or television program. And remember, in our territory, Trinidad and Tobago, the mass use license is protected under related rights. Now, as I said, this is supposed to be quite simple. I'm trying my best to unravel the perplexities, but people tend to misconstrue this language. For example, you might hear someone say, go to the music publisher. He will give you a mass use license, which will automatically grant you a synchronization license to clear all the rights to use the music in the soundtrack. Ladies and gentlemen, to the layperson, it may sound correct because you're using music industry terms. But for those who are knowledgeable about this, that language, that was painful. I have not even used the word music publisher in my presentation. Although the music publisher is important, but he has to be contextualized, which I would bring up in our next slide. Thank you. So we're getting down to how do we obtain clearances. And first and foremost, we have to connect the dots. We are dealing with musical works here that is applicable to the synchronization license. You actually have three options. You can go directly to the author, to the top right, master control, providing that he has not transferred or divested his interest with any other entity. He can authorize the use of his musical work and give you the estimated cost. Second on the list, here comes the music publisher. And who is the music publisher? The music publisher is an individual or entity who acts on behalf of the author of the musical work. They have this agreement and contract where the publisher's role is to represent the interest of the author of the musical work. So by going to the music publisher, he is now authorized on behalf of the author of the musical work to give you an estimated cost for the synchronization license. Third on the list, an organization known as a collective management organization, a CMO. All right, the CMO in a local, regional, and international context is our local copyright music organization of Trinidad and Tobago. In the region, we have the Eastern Caribbean Collection Organization, ECHO, and the US, they are known as PROs, Performance Rights Organizations, ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, and the like. Providing, this is very specific, providing part of their mandate is to issue synchronization licenses on behalf of authors and musical works. You can go to the CMO, but quite specifically, the mandate of this CMO must be a copyright mandate, meaning that they administer musical works on behalf of authors and maybe publishers. So we can go to our next slide. And we get to obtaining clearances in song recordings. So we see where I'm connecting the dots, musical works and now song recordings. You also have three options. Master control again, or first image on our upper right, you can go directly to the artist. Most of the times within the Caribbean and the region, these artists are not signed to record labels, and they can authorize, they are the owners of their song recordings and can authorize use of those song recordings and give you the estimated cost. Second on the list, internationally, this has been the standard of the music industry, that record labels were the entities to invest in the artists and cover all of the cost regarding the song recording. So they are the owners of the song recording. And you can go directly to those record labels to obtain permission to use the song recordings via a mass use license, and they can give you an estimated cost. Third on the list, we're back to the CMO. And this CMO, like the CMO that administers musical works on behalf of authors and composers, there are CMOs that administers song recordings on behalf of the owners of song recordings, whether the artists or record producers. So you can go directly to these CMOs to obtain a mass use license, and providing that their mandate is administration of related rights or neighboring rights. We can go to the other slide, and I will just take a little wipe here. Thank you. Okay. So we're going into understanding public domain. I'm going to go directly with this definition here. A musical work or song recording is in a public domain when the intellectual property rights have expired. My colleagues, intellectual property does have an expiry date, and there's a formula that is used known as duration of rights. There's a minimum and there's a maximum. What I have here is the minimum, and it's calculated on both the musical work and song recording separately. How do we calculate when a musical work goes into the public domain, meaning when it's free to use? You do not need any permission. We calculate that as the life of the author and 50 years after his death. As far as the song recording is concerned, there's no lifetime that is applied, but it's a very straight 50 calendar years from when that song recording was actually produced. I must state that the 50 years is minimum, and some countries have chosen to extend that 50 years to something like 70 years, some 95, and some 100. So depending on the territory, you would find that the expiry dates differ in time. You ask the question, what happens when we have more than one writer that contributed to the musical work? The answer is quite simple. We use a very interesting calculation. That is calculated as if you have more than one writer on the same song, then that goes into public domain after the death of the last surviving author. The last surviving author. Let me give an example. The music of the Beatles, you know, that very successful, famous group in the 60s in the UK. The music of the Beatles back then to now is very far from the public domain. Why? Because out of the 4 members, 2 members are still with us. Paul McCartney and the drummer Ringo Starr. So until both of them passes, and whoever passes last, and we're dealing with the UK, you have to calculate 70 years. 70 years after the passing of the last author for this song to go in the public domain. So we can go to the other slide now. So we get into adverse effects of not obtaining a license. What is intellectual property infringement? So intellectual property infringement is any breach or violation of one's intellectual property rights. In other words, should you use, abuse, misuse, misappropriate, steal anyone's intellectual property without obtaining the necessary permission, immediately violates their rights, and that is known as an infringement. However, intellectual property is, thank you, calculated, goes 2 ways. Infringement goes 2 ways. Authors are allowed to assert what are known as their economic rights and allowed to assert their moral rights. Economic rights are concerned with financial gain. It's how the rights owners are compensated. Whereas moral rights are not concerned with financial gain, but maintains that there is this personal connection between an author and his art, where the infringement comes in. Let's look at our left. Upper half of our left. Should you not obtain a synchronization license to use the musical works, then you would have infringed this author's economic rights. In other words, you would have caused him to lose out on being paid for his work. We apply that to the song recording. If you did not obtain a mass use license to use the song recording, you would have caused this producer to also lose out on being compensated. How do we calculate an infringement? Oh, sorry, I'm not finished yet, sorry. Back to the previous slide, thank you. Yes, let's deal with some moral rights infringements here. Here's a sip of water. Moral rights infringement is different from the economic infringement. And there are 2 words that are associated with moral rights: the rights of attribution and the right of integrity. Attribution simply states that the author has to be identified as the author. In other words, film producers, you have a legal obligation to credit the author for his offerings. If that does not happen, we can just imagine the adverse effects of this author not being recognized and not given his bragging rights. And that could cause him to lose out. We can even go deeper to say, when it comes to EGOTs, you know, those award ceremonies where you get best song, whether it's an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, or Tony Award. If no one knows who you are, then you can lose out on an EGOT if you are not credited. That's how deep it goes. We can even go deeper when we're dealing with the right of integrity. Let me read this example here. to object to specific uses of his musical works that may be harmful to his reputation. At first glance, that does not sound like something that's very sugar-coated, because it connects to the personality of the author, his standards, his beliefs. Even if he's involved in activism or an advocate. For example, you can be an animal rights activist. You can be pro-life. You can be a feminist. And your public stance on LGBTQIA+ issues, how does it all connect? Should any film contain any activity that adversely affects an author's, I would say, deepest convictions, that is an infringement of their right of integrity. And the redress can be quite profound. Next slide. So seeking redress for infringement goes two ways. We are guided by our copyright acts, domestic copyright acts. We're talking about legal systems, further supported by international, multilateral, and bilateral treaties. It is within those treaties, it is identified if an activity is recognized as a civil wrong or a criminal offense. If it is a civil wrong, then we have civil remedies to treat with that. And that can range from injunctions to damages where you compensate the author, or if it's a criminal offense, we get harsher. The redress is you can be incarcerated or be charged hefty fines. I'm sorry to end on this very profound but very serious note, and let's consider to be forewarned is to be forearmed. I believe this is the end of my presentation. Let me check with my organizers if we have room for question and answers. That's my contact information here. Feel free to contact me. My email address, engage me. Let us talk. Hi, Michaela.
All right, thanks so much, Fabian, for that. I mean, there's so much information that we can take from that. So I have a couple questions that you could possibly ask before we wrap up. And I guess my first one would be, is from your experience, what do you think is the main or most common mistake that filmmakers sometimes make when shooting a film? When it comes to music clearances, is there something that happens very often that is easy to not do? Like, what is your suggestion?
I think the word on the ground is based on this presentation, the issue of understanding when it comes to music clearances. It is so complex, right? It is not that straightforward that a lot of film producers would just shy away or stay away from even going through the entire process and maybe just go straight to open source music or royalty-free music or music that already exists. You know, that's what I've noticed. But I think it's the education and awareness to let them know that there's a lot of advantages that comes with working with original music and original composers, and we just need to provide that information for them. Yes.
Yes, which you've definitely started to do today, so thank you for that. Yes. And also, so I personally don't have much experience when it comes to music clearances in films. And so one clarification I wanted to know if you could share with us is, so you talked about musical works versus sound recordings when getting licenses and stuff like that. So from my understanding, is it that musical works is the written music and lyrics, like if you wanted to remaster it or something in your film? So yeah, if you could give us maybe a couple examples of that.
Okay, right. So the musical work, let's just imagine someone with a copybook that is writing this lyrics down, and while he's writing the lyrics down, he's composing this melody in his head. That right there is the musical work, nothing else. Lyrics and the melody. The song recording is a process. It means now that you have to translate this musical work into another type of expression where you would need the contribution of other players. The musical work, which is just lyrics and melody, cannot perform itself. So now you need to engage a song to actually sing the musical work. And while he is performing that musical work, it can be recorded and mixed, and other musicians can add to it, other background vocalists can add to it, and that process is called the making of the song recording, and that is the main difference. So see the song recording as a subject matter that actually, it embodies the musical work. The musical work didn't go anywhere, it's just part of the song recording, or the musical work is enshrined within the song recording. That's why they're actually integrated together.
Okay, great. And then so, I mean, similar to that, so then if, let's say I got the musical works and I re-recorded the song for my film, is it that I would then own the rights to that remastering almost?
Let me say that carefully. You obtain the musical work from where exactly?
So from the artist, say I got the musical work from the artist, I was able to use the lyrics and the music in my film, but I remastered it, I re-recorded it for my film. Is it that I would then own those rights?
I know what you're saying, and let me put it in our context. You always need permission from the original author of the musical work, the lyrics and the melody, to re-record their song, right? Once that permission is granted, in other words, you can create a new song recording with their original musical work. You would own the song recording, but not own the copyright in the lyrics and the melody.
Yes, I see. Okay, great. And then, so another question is that, so is there any limit or like minimum or maximum that you can use sound in a film? So is it that it might be allowed to use 5 seconds of the sound, say it's coming from a radio or something like that, but anything more than 10 seconds you have to have rights for? Or is it that any use of the sound or the musical works has to be copyrighted? You have to have a license for it?
Well, that is a very loaded question. Let's just take it within the parameters of use. Your agreement will decide how much you can use. Either you can use the entire length of the song, or you can use limited 30 seconds or 1 minute. That is guided by an agreement. But on the other side of the coin, there may be times where you can use music where you may not have to obtain permission, but that falls within a context of a fair use policy. And it has to be for maybe educational purposes, or maybe news or court proceedings. There's a specific procedure for that. But naturally, an agreement should guide how long music should use. And let me say, I use this example with even James Brown's Scream, a couple seconds. If you use that without permission, that is copyright infringement.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much. I think that's all the questions we really have right now, but thank you so much for sharing your information. And so I know people can possibly reach out to you if they have questions that come up later. And so thanks again, everybody. And thank you, Mr. Alfonso, for joining us. This was brought to you with the support of Republic Bank Limited. And on behalf of the TTFF, we hope that you gain some insight into this topic, and we hope to see you again at other events throughout the festival, especially our award ceremony that's happening tonight. So if you enjoyed this presentation or have any suggestions, please be sure to share your experience with us via email, admin@filmcode.org. If you do happen to post about us on social media also, please tag us in your post. We like to remain connected to you. So we wish you all the best and enjoy the rest of the festival. Only one day to go. Thank you.